to the hard pan.
Scott? Scott, what's up?
How's it going? I'm a Latter-day Saint, and I'll debate you.
Okay.
I would debate that you have no qualification to call yourself an expert on Latter-day Saint faith, but
Did I call myself an expert on Latter-day Saints?
Well, you went on a podcast recently and were bragging about all of the things that you know about our faith. And
did I claim to be an expert on it? Did I claim to be an expert on it?
I think in the way you represented yourself, you portrayed yourself as an expert.
Okay, so your interpretation of my talk was as if I was claiming to be an expert, even though I didn't do that.
That's correct.
Okay, why would I believe a prophet who writes himself into Genesis 50?
Because he restores other ancient scripture that we can demonstrate.
Okay, if there are no texts prior to Joseph Smith that include Joseph Smith in Genesis 50, why would I believe that he's a restorer prophet?
I just told you why, because there are other examples of him restoring ancient scripture.
How does that tell me that? But why does that vindicate this action, which is obviously an action of a con man?
It's not obviously an action of a con man.
Okay, there's no copies of Genesis prior to Joseph Smith that include him being prophesied there. He translates a text that includes 11 verses about himself. And why should I believe that that's an action of a prophet?
What's the oldest copy of the Old Testament that we have? About 250 BC, right?
How does that hurt your case? How does that help your case?
Because it's a long, long time before that Genesis is written. There's a lot of time that things can be taken out.
Okay, and what's the evidence that anyone took anything out of Genesis 50?
Well, I think you have a lot of biblical scholars who will argue that
where is the evidence? You're citing generic scholars. Where's a specific proof or evidence or argument that Genesis 50 was redacted?
I don't have specific evidence for Genesis 50.
So none at all.
But I do have specific evidence that Joseph Smith restored other ancient scripture.
Where is the proof? So that's assuming that he's a prophet and a restorer. And I'm saying that why should I believe that he is a prophet and a restorer, first of all? And the evidence that I see is that he adds himself to an ancient text, which is an action of a con man. And there are no texts that have any mention of Joseph Smith prior to Joseph Smith of Genesis 50. And your argument was, well, Genesis is really old, and there's some scholars that talk about redactions. How does any of that prove that Genesis 50 was ever redacted to remove Joseph Smith?
It doesn't prove it specifically.
Oh, thank you. So there's no proof, no argument there. Where's the argument you're going to make? Make an argument, please.
I just made an argument.
No, you didn't make an argument. You just admitted that there was no...
You just keep cutting me off.
You just admitted that there's no textual evidence of any of that. You cited generic scholars. I said, where's the argument that Genesis 50 was redacted?
You can let me make the argument, or we can be done. It's your call.
When are you going to make an argument? You haven't yet. You just admitted that...
You keep cutting me off.
No, I'm not cutting you off. I'm pointing out your arguments are wrong. You didn't make an argument yet.
I have started 3 times
Where was the argument?
I have started multiple times to tell you.
Where is
Joseph Smith? If Joseph Smith demonstrates that he can truly restore
that's what's in question, dude. That's what's in question.
One instance, please let me finish. Let me finish.
I'm not going to let you say crap that is the thing in question. Your argument is presuming that he is a restorer, and I'm calling that into question.
No, I'm trying to show you evidence that he's a restorer.
Where's the evidence?
He restores. He restores sections of the Book of Enoch before the Book of Enoch is discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Why would I believe that when Genesis 50 has him writing himself into it when no text says him in Genesis 50? You argued that, well, it's been...
I just told you.
Dude,
I just told you.
Shut up. You said it was redacted. You said Genesis was redacted. Where's the evidence of that?
The evidence is that the Book of Enoch and writings of Enoch were redacted.
Where is the evidence that Genesis was redacted?
Because now we have multiple copies of the books of Enoch that have surfaced.
Genesis. Where is the evidence that Genesis 50 was redacted? You said that there's scholars
that say this. Does Genesis talk about Enoch?
Where is the... Stop talking or I'm booting you. In Genesis 50, you said it's been redacted to remove things. This is the section that predicts Joseph Smith, supposedly. Where is the evidence that you claimed Genesis 50 has been redacted?
And I told you I don't have specific evidence.
So there's no argument for that. Correct. Thank you.
There's argument for Joseph Smith restoring other ancient texts. And if
I don't accept him as a restorer. I just gave you an argument.
You don't even know about the evidence. How can you?
I just gave you I don't need to, because this argument disproves his prophetic status as he's a con man. This right here.
That's total hogwash.
How?
You're completely unwilling to look at any evidence of his prophetic
I don't need to go.
of any kind.
That's like arguing
because you say that you can't prove one instance.
That's like arguing that I have to go through a whole person's life and see if they ever said something correct, which I'm not granting that he did, in order to prove that one giant flaw that proves him as a con man is no longer valid. That would be ridiculous. All I need is one. All I need is one. All I need is one instance of him being a con man to know that he's a con man, and this is it.
But here's the problem with that. That's your judgment of him. That's not proof.
Oh my gosh, this is too stupid to even continue with this. So showing you that he added himself is my judgment. It's not actually what he did, even though you just admitted that there's no evidence that Genesis 50 was redacted.
No.
This is too stupid. This is Mormonism. Man.
All right, so that's Joseph Smith's special authority right there. The guy was, basically the guy said, and this is me talking now, basically all he had to do was show that the book of Genesis originally had Joseph Smith in chapter 50 of the book of Genesis to prove he was not a con man. And that guy just basically kind of did a slippery slope. And he tried to go to an unrelated subject. Okay, somebody is calling me. I'll have to end the stream. I do apologize.